Welcome back, everyone. There is a strange kind of peace you can only find on an empty road late at night, with just your headlights cutting through the darkness. But that isolation we seek can also become a trap. The familiar comfort of your car can instantly turn into a cage when you realize you are not alone out there. Tonight, we are going to explore that feeling. We will hear stories from people whose ordinary drives turned into desperate struggles for survival, where the only other person for miles was the one they were trying to escape from. As you listen, drop a comment down below telling us where you are watching from and what time it is. Now, turn down the lights and lock your doors. When I was a senior in high school back in 2022, I worked as a delivery driver for a local pizza place in my suburban Ohio town. It was called Gino's Pizzeria, a family-owned shop, and it was a pretty typical teenage job. I was familiar with the delivery routine. I had been doing it for over a year. I knew the town well, and nothing truly strange had ever happened to me on a delivery, until that one night in January. Most of the time, I did not take the orders over the phone. One of the guys who worked the counter, Mike, would handle that. He would take the order, get the pizza made, and then I would just run in, grab the insulated bag, and head out. This night was no different. It was snowing pretty heavily, which usually meant a busy night for deliveries and good tips. I had just gotten back from a run when Mike handed me the next order. As I took the pizza bag from him, he said something unusual. "Hey, Kevin, make sure that guy pays in full. Cash." The way he said it was serious, not his usual joking tone. It was an obvious instruction. Of course, I had to make sure the customer paid, so the fact that he felt the need to spell it out was weird. But it was busy, and I was in a rush to get back on the road before the snow got any worse, so I just nodded and said, "Okay," as I headed out the door. Sitting in my car, a beat-up old Honda Accord, I let the engine warm up and thought about what Mike had said. Why the specific warning? I figured it was probably just some guy who had tried to argue about prices or use an expired coupon over the phone. I put the thought out of my mind, put the car in drive, and started the 10-minute journey to the customer's house. The roads were mostly empty because of the late hour and the bad weather. As soon as I pulled out of the pizzeria's parking lot and onto the main street, I noticed a pair of headlights speed up behind me. A dark-colored SUV came up fast, getting right on my tail before easing off the gas and matching my speed perfectly. I did not think much of it at first. People in my town had a habit of driving way too fast at night when they thought no one was watching. Still, with the roads getting slick from the snow, it was a pretty stupid way to drive. I maintained a safe speed, hoping the driver would either get impatient and pass me or turn off onto a different street. But he did not. He just stayed right behind me, keeping a constant distance. Turn for turn, he mirrored my every move. My annoyance started to curdle into a slight sense of unease. This did not feel right. We reached a major intersection, and the light was red. The SUV pulled into the lane next to mine. I made a point of staring straight ahead at the traffic light, a little trick I used to avoid making awkward eye contact with other drivers. But then I heard someone yelling from the car next to me. I glanced over. A man was staring directly at me. His window rolled all the way down despite the snow and cold. He was gesturing wildly. I immediately broke eye contact and looked forward again, pretending I had not heard him. I started fiddling with the pizza bag on my passenger seat, acting like I was searching for something, hoping he would give up. But he started yelling again, louder this time, telling me to roll my window down. I kept my eyes fixed on the traffic light, my heart starting to beat faster. As soon as the light turned green, I hit the gas and pulled away quickly. The man did not give up. He sped up too, staying right next to me, swerving erratically in his lane. His window was still down, and I could see him constantly looking over at me, trying to get my attention. He looked angry, his face contorted in a scowl. There was no way I was stopping to talk to this guy. I was not even scared at this point, just really annoyed and unnerved. My first thought was to duck down a side street and try to lose him, but the heavy snow made me hesitate. I had no idea if the residential side roads had been plowed yet, and the last thing I wanted was to get my car stuck in a snowbank with this lunatic right there with me. I decided to take my chances and stay on the main road. The customer's house was only a minute or two away now. Just as I was approaching the turn for the customer's neighborhood, the SUV still beside me suddenly accelerated. The driver swerved hard into my lane, directly in front of me, trying to cut me off and force me to stop. I slammed on my brakes out of pure instinct. My tires locked up and the car started to slide on a patch of ice. Luckily for me, the other driver had the same problem. His aggressive maneuver cost him all his traction. His SUV continued to slide, fishtailing wildly before spinning off the road completely and plowing nose first into a thick snowdrift on the shoulder. His vehicle was stuck, angled almost completely backward. My adrenaline was pumping, and my hands were shaking as I slowly rolled past his stuck car. I looked in my mirrors and saw him trying to reverse, his tires just spinning uselessly in the deep snow. I sped up, wanting to put as much distance between us as possible. I felt a little bad just leaving him there, but I was certain he had bad intentions, and I was not about to stick around to find out what they were. A minute later, I pulled into the driveway of the customer's house. I grabbed the pizza and walked up to the front door. The lights were on inside, so I knocked. I waited. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, and rang the doorbell. Nothing. After a full minute of standing in the cold, I called my boss, Mike. He said he would call the customer's number to let them know I was there. I kept knocking and ringing the doorbell. A minute later, Mike called me back. He didn't pick up, he said. I stood there on the porch, confused, looking at the lit-up house. And then, all the pieces started to click together in my head. The weird warning from Mike, the car that followed me from the shop, the aggressive driver, the empty house. I ran back to my car, got in, and locked the doors. I drove out of the neighborhood, taking a completely different route back to the pizzeria, just in case. When I got back, I told Mike what had happened. He looked pale. I knew it, he said. The guy who ordered gave me a really bad feeling on the phone. That's why I told you to be careful. I think his plan was to follow you, get you to pull over, and then rob you of the pizza and your wallet. It all made perfect sense. The reason the man was not at home to answer the door was because he was sitting in a snowdrift a few blocks away. I do not know for sure if that was his plan, but my boss and I were both convinced. Mike said he would give the guy's phone number and address to the police. I am not sure if he ever did, because I never heard anything else about it. But I do know that we never got another order from that phone number again. My job in 2023 was the definition of mind-numbing. I worked as a data processor for a large logistics company in Portland, Oregon. My shift was from 2 in the afternoon until 11 at night, 5 days a week. For 9 hours, I sat in a gray cubicle under fluorescent lights, staring at spreadsheets and listening to the quiet tapping of keyboards. The work was soul-crushing, but the one part of my day I genuinely looked forward to was the drive home. I lived about 45 minutes outside the city, in a small, quiet town nestled in the woods. To get there, I had to take a long, winding road called Black Creek Road. That drive was my ritual, my way of decompressing. After being surrounded by the low hum of computers and recycled air, the feeling of rolling down the windows of my old Toyota Camry and breathing in the cool pine-scented air was like therapy. The road itself was dark, mortared by enormous Douglas firs that blotted out the stars, but I knew every curve and dip by heart. It was my road. On this particular night in October, a thick fog had rolled in off the coast. It was the kind of dense, heavy fog that swallows sound and makes the world feel small and confined. My headlights could only penetrate about 15 feet in front of me, turning the familiar road into something alien and mysterious. The giant trees on either side were just vague, towering shadows. I had my classical music station playing softly on the radio and was sipping the last of a lukewarm coffee from the office break room. I was about 20 minutes from home, deep into the most isolated stretch of Black Creek Road when I saw it. Through the soupy white mist, a single light blinked weakly. It was a small reddish light, and it pulsed on and off irregularly. I could not tell how far away it was or even what side of the road it was on. My first thought was that it was a cyclist with a broken light, which was a terrifying idea on a night like this. I immediately took my foot off the gas, letting the Camry slow down on its own. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The light blinked a few more times and then went out completely, plunging the road ahead back into total darkness. My heart started beating a little faster. An animal, maybe? A deer with an unusual reflection in its eyes? I slowed the car to a crawl, maybe 15 miles an hour, my hands tight on the steering wheel. That is when a shape emerged from the fog. It was the boxy silhouette of an old car, a real junker, pulling out from the shoulder directly into my path. It was a massive, beat-up sedan, the kind that looked like it had been in a dozen accidents and never properly fixed. Its lights were completely off. I stomped on the brakes, but the damp road and my worn tires did not offer much help. My car slid forward with a sickening lack of resistance, and the front of my Camry bumped into the sedan's rear bumper with a dull plastic crunch. It was not a hard impact, more of a solid tap, but the sound echoed in the silent, foggy night. For a moment, I just sat there, my mind trying to catch up with what had just happened. My music was still playing softly, a calm piano piece that felt completely out of place. I killed the engine and the radio, and the silence that rushed in was absolute. My first feeling was annoyance. A fender bender on this empty road in the middle of the night. I took a few deep breaths, telling myself to stay calm. I saw some movement in the driver's seat of the car in front of me, a shifting silhouette, but I could not make out any details. Assuming the driver would get out, I opened my door and stepped out into the damp cold. The fog was so thick I could taste it, wet and earthy. I stood by my car door, waiting. The driver's side door of the old sedan creaked open, and a man slowly got out. He was a big guy, tall and wide, wearing a dark, heavy jacket despite the mild autumn weather. He looked to be in his 50s, with a heavy brow and a scruffy, unkempt beard. He shut his door, started walking toward me, but his movements were strange. He was not looking at me or my car. Instead, his head was on a swivel, his eyes scanning the dark woods on either side of the road as if he were looking for something. I decided to speak first, to try and take control of the weird situation. "Hey, is everything okay?" He pulled out pretty suddenly back there. He stopped a few feet away from me. He still would not make eye contact. His gaze was fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder, darting back and forth into the darkness. The fog swirled around him, making him look like some strange apparition. After a long, uncomfortable silence, he finally spoke, his voice a low, gravelly mumble. "Yeah, sorry, that was it. Just 2 words." The way he said it, so dismissively, sent a chill down my spine. This did not feel like a normal post-accident interaction. I wanted out of there, fast. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't see any real damage to either car. My bumper is a little scuffed, but that's it. I think we can just go our separate ways." I started to reach for my car door handle, ready to get in and leave. "Wait," he said, his voice a little sharper this time. He finally looked at me, but his eyes were flat and empty. "I want to check my car. Make sure." I hesitated. It was a reasonable request, I guess. I nodded slowly. "Okay." I stood by my open door, watching him. He walked to the back of his car, to the spot where I had hit him. He ran a hand over the bumper, but he did not seem to be actually looking at it. Then he did something that set off every alarm bell in my head. He started walking along the side of his car, away from the point of impact, still pretending to inspect for damage. He was moving toward his passenger side, farther away from me and closer to the dark woods. My eyes were glued on him, trying to figure out his angle. As he reached the passenger side front door, my gaze flickered to the inside of his car. And then I saw it. In the back seat, a second figure was rising up. It had been lying down, completely hidden from view. It was another large shape, a hulking shadow moving toward the rear passenger door, the one closest to me. I did not think. I did not weigh my options. I dove into my car, slammed the door, and hit the lock button. The click of the mechanism was the loudest sound I had ever heard. At the same exact moment, the back door of the sedan flew open, and a second man, just as large as the first, got out. Both of them were now looking directly at me. They started waving their hands frantically, motioning for me to stop, to wait. The first man was shouting something I could not understand through the glass. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. I cranked the engine, which roared to life, and threw the car into drive. I wrenched the steering wheel to the left, pulling around their car and onto the narrow shoulder of the road. My tires spun in the wet gravel for a second before catching. As I accelerated away, the two men started running toward me, their faces twisted in anger. I floored it. The Camry shot forward into the fog. I looked in my rearview mirror. For a terrifying moment, all I saw was the swirling white mist. Then, their headlights flashed on, two bright beams cutting through the fog, right behind me. They were coming after me. I did not let up on the gas, pushing my little car faster than I ever had on that road. The beams stayed behind me for what felt like an eternity, maybe 30 or 40 seconds. I was expecting them to be right on my tail at any moment. But then, as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished. The road behind me was black again. I did not slow down. My mind was racing. Was it a trick? Were they just waiting for me up ahead? Lights off? I kept driving at top speed until I saw the familiar glow of the gas station that marked the edge of my town. It was about 5 minutes from my house. I pulled in, my heart hammering against my ribs, and parked by the brightly lit pumps. I killed the engine and just sat there, shaking. I waited for 15 minutes, watching the entrance to the station, expecting to see that old, beat-up sedan pull in. It never did. The road remained empty. Eventually, my breathing returned to normal, and I forced myself to drive the last few minutes home. I did not report it to the police that night. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that maybe it was all a weird misunderstanding. But the more I replayed it in my head, the more certain I became that I had narrowly escaped something terrible. The way they pulled out with no lights, the second man hiding in the back, their sudden desperation when I got back in my car. It was all part of a plan. I do not know what they wanted, but I know it was not to exchange insurance information. I never drove Black Creek Road at night again. I was in my late 20s back in 2023, and I had been driving a truck for a couple of years. I mostly did regional runs, hauling lumber and other building materials around the Pacific Northwest. It was a lonely job, but I liked the solitude and the steady rhythm of the road. This particular trip had me driving a load from Missoula, Montana, down to Boise, Idaho. It was late November, and a surprise snowstorm had rolled into the mountains, turning the highways into a slick white mess. I had been on the road for about 9 hours already, and the snow was coming down thick and heavy. It was the kind of snow that sticks to your windshield faster than the wipers can clear it. I was on a remote stretch of highway in rural Montana, surrounded by dark, pine-covered hills. My high beams were on, but they did not do much good against the wall of white falling in front of me. That is when I saw a strange, flickering light in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a reflection or a weird trick of the snow. But as I got closer, the light grew larger and brighter. It was a deep, angry orange, and it was pulsing against the dark sky. I realized with a jolt that it was a fire, a big one. The falling snow made it impossible to tell if it was on the highway itself or just off to the side. But either way, I was approaching it way too fast. I gently tapped my brakes, trying to slow the massive weight of my truck and trailer without sending it into a skid. I had completely misjudged the distance in the storm. The fire was much closer than I thought. I had to press down harder on the brake pedal, and I felt the terrifying sensation of my trailer starting to slide sideways behind me. My heart leaped into my throat. I immediately let off the brakes, and the trailer snapped back into line with a violent jolt that shook the entire cab. It was a close call. I managed to get the rig under control and pull over safely onto the shoulder of the highway, a good distance from the flames. I leaned across the cab and looked out the passenger window. There, just off the road at the edge of the tree line, was a small car completely engulfed in flames. The fire was roaring, melting the snow in a wide circle around it. I had never seen anything like it in my life. I was completely in awe of the destructive sight. My first thought was that there might be someone hurt, someone who needed help. Without thinking twice, I undid my seatbelt, grabbed my heavy coat, and jumped out of the cab into the freezing cold. I kept a safe distance from the fire, but I circled the scene, shouting to see if anyone was there. The car itself did not look like it had crashed. It seemed to be parked normally, just with a massive fire consuming it from the inside out. There was no sign of another vehicle, no tracks in the fresh snow other than my own. Not seeing anyone nearby, a horrible thought entered my mind. What if someone was still inside the car? I pulled out my phone, my fingers numb from the cold, and was relieved to see I had a weak signal. I called 911. The dispatcher told me that police were about 15 minutes away and that the fire department and ambulance would be even longer. As I stood there in the cold, waiting and watching the car burn, I started to feel like something was very wrong. The scene just did not look like an accident. It felt intentional. The thought sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I decided it was best to wait in the relative safety of my locked truck. I turned to head back to my cab. "Hey, hold up." The voice came from beside me, out of the darkness and the swirling snow. It was so sudden it made me jump. I looked in the direction of the voice, and my heart started to race as two men walked toward me. They were both wearing dark winter clothes and ski masks that covered the lower half of their faces. "Evening," I said, trying to sound casual. "Crazy scene, huh? Do you know what happened?" I assumed they must have been in another car that had stopped. They both just shook their heads. This was incredibly odd. I had not seen or heard another vehicle pull up. There was no way they could have walked here in the middle of a remote highway during a snowstorm. A terrible feeling started to grow in the pit of my stomach. "Well, the police are on their way, so I'm just going to wait in my truck," I said, beginning to walk away, trying not to look scared. "No," one of the men said, his voice flat and hard. I stopped and turned back around. In that moment, I was face to face with the most terrifying sight of my life. The man was holding a handgun, and it was pointed directly at my chest. My blood ran cold. I immediately put my hands up. I told him he could have whatever he wanted, that I would not give him any trouble. He told me to turn around and stand with my hands against the side of my trailer. He aggressively patted me down, taking my wallet and my phone. While he held the gun on me, the other man climbed up into the cab of my truck and started rummaging through it, looking for anything of value. I was trying my best not to cry, my mind filled with images of my family. I was absolutely sure now that these were the men who had set that car on fire. They had likely robbed someone else just like me, and since I did not see anyone else around, I could only imagine what that meant for the car's owner. And for me. After a minute, the second man came back from my truck. He put his hand on the shoulder of the man holding the gun and leaned in, whispering something in his ear. I could not hear what he said. I braced myself for the worst. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they both turned and ran back into the darkness, disappearing into the thick falling snow. I was in shock, still standing with my hands against the cold metal of my truck. After a few moments, I scrambled back into my cab and locked the doors. Without my phone, all I could do was sit there and wait for the police to arrive. The incident became a big news story in the area for a while. It turned out my suspicions were correct. The two men had carjacked and robbed an elderly woman who had pulled over on the side of the road. They set her car on fire to destroy any evidence. They were caught a few weeks later. During their interrogation, they eventually told the police where they had left a poor woman's body, but they never gave a clear reason for why they came back to the scene when they saw my truck stop. Maybe they just wanted to rob me too, but it seemed like a huge risk for such a small reward. Most of all, I will never understand why they decided to let me live, considering what they had just done to their previous victim. I am grateful every day that they did, but it changed me. My advice to anyone now is if you see something dangerous on the road, stay in your car, lock the doors, and call for help. Do not try to be a hero, because you might end up being the one who needs saving. I drove for a rideshare service in Philadelphia for a few years to make ends meet. It was a decent gig for the most part. I set my own hours, and on good nights, the money was solid. The holidays were always the best time for business. More people were out at parties or family gatherings, and they were usually in a generous mood. In 2022, I was living alone and did not have any family in the area, so Christmas Eve was just another workday for me. I figured I would drive until the requests dried up and then go home. The day started out great. I hit the road around 10 in the morning, and it was back-to-back rides all day. The city was alive with holiday spirit and people were tipping well. By 8 o'clock that night, I had already made more than I usually did in a full 12-hour shift. I was feeling good, but a nasty winter mix of snow and sleet had started to fall, making the road slick. I decided to take a quick dinner break at a cheese steak place and then head back out for a few more hours. The bad weather meant fewer drivers would be out, which meant higher fares for me. After my break, the requests had slowed down, but they were still trickling in. I picked up a group of college kids from a party and dropped them off at their dorm. As they were getting out, a new ride request popped up. The pickup location was in the same neighborhood, which was a bit of a rundown area with old narrow row houses packed tightly together. The group I had just dropped off had been perfectly nice though, so I accepted the new fare without a second thought. As I was pulling away from the curb, a man stepped out from between two parked cars. He waved his hand to get my attention, confirming he was my rider. The falling sleet and the dim streetlights made it hard to see him clearly, but he was wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt with the hood pulled up low over his face. As my car got closer, he looked agitated, constantly glancing over his shoulder down the dark street. This was not entirely unusual for this part of town, so I tried not to judge. I pulled up next to him, and he quickly got into the back seat. "Where to?" I asked, looking at him in the rearview mirror as I pulled back into the street. He did not answer right away. He was still looking out the back window, his body tense. I waited a few seconds, then I spoke again, a little louder this time. "Sir, where can I take you?" I made eye contact with him in the mirror for just a second. His eyes were wide and unfocused. He looked away quickly and then reached into the pocket of his hoodie. For a terrifying second, my mind jumped to the worst possible conclusion, but he just pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. Just take me here," he mumbled, handing the paper to me over the seat. I took the piece of paper. On it was an address, scribbled in messy, barely legible handwriting. It was for a street I had never even heard of, which was rare for me. I had been driving in this city for years. I knew it like the back of my hand. My first thought was that it must be in one of the outer suburbs, a long and probably unprofitable drive, especially in this weather. I pulled over at an empty intersection and opened the GPS app on my phone. I carefully typed in the street name and address from the paper. The app searched for a moment, and then a message popped up. No results found. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I checked the paper again, making sure I had not made a typo. I typed it in again, slowly and deliberately. Same result. Something was very wrong. Sir," I said, turning in my seat to face him. "This address isn't coming up." "I don't think it exists." His whole demeanor changed in an instant. The nervous energy was gone, replaced by a cold, hard authority. "Yeah, just pull over here," he said, his voice firm and demanding. I knew exactly what was happening. I tried to stay calm, to not show any fear. I did as he said, pulling my car over to the side of the dark, empty street. There were no other cars, no pedestrians, nothing but boarded-up houses and the sound of sleet tapping on my roof. I put the car in park and kept my hands on the steering wheel, just staring straight ahead. I saw him turn in the back seat, looking out the side window as if he were checking for something. Then, in a single violent motion, he lunged forward, his body coming between the two front seats. He grabbed the back of my head with one hand, and with the other, he pressed the cold, hard metal of a small pistol against my temple. He started screaming at me, his voice raw and filled with rage. "Give me your wallet. Give me your keys. Give me everything." I was in so much shock that I could not move. My mind was blank. All I could feel was the intense pain of the gun barrel being ground into the side of my head. My slow reaction seemed to make him even angrier. He kept yelling, his spit hitting the side of my face. I'd finally managed to snap out of it, fumbling for my wallet in my back pocket. I was trying to comply, trying to be fast, but my hands were shaking and clumsy. I guess I was not moving fast enough for him. He pulled the gun away from my head for a second, and then I felt a blinding, explosive pain as he pistol whipped me in the back of the skull. My vision went blurry, filled with flashing white spots. A wave of nausea and dizziness washed over me. Dazed and barely conscious, I managed to get my wallet out and toss it onto the passenger seat. I do not know what I did to set him off again, but he hit me a second time in the same spot. The world went dark for a second, and the pain was unbearable. I think he must have realized I was about to pass out. He took the opportunity to get out of the car. I heard his door open and close. That was the last thing I remembered. I woke up lying on the sidewalk. I do not know how long I was out, but it felt like only a few minutes. I was covered in a layer of melting snow and was shivering uncontrollably from the cold. My car was gone. My wallet, keys, and phone were gone too. My head was throbbing with a pain so intense it made me want to throw up. Every movement sent a fresh wave of agony through my skull. Shivering and disoriented, I managed to get to my feet. I stumbled down the empty sidewalks, through the snow and sleet, until I saw the distant, welcoming glow of a 24-hour gas station. I made my way inside, and the clerk took one look at me and immediately called for help. The police found my car abandoned on the side of a road about a week later, miles outside the city. I was lucky to have no permanent injuries, but the aftermath was a nightmare. Getting a new phone, driver's license, bank cards, it was a huge hassle, and without my car, I could not work. The whole experience was awful, but what still bothers me the most is how needlessly violent the guy was. I was giving him what he wanted. There was no reason to hurt me like that. His goal was obviously not to kill me, so why the aggression? Since then, I stopped doing ride shares with my own vehicle. I got a job with a city taxi company where they provide the car and have better safety measures. But I never work on holidays anymore. I learned the hard way that just because it is Christmas, it does not mean the monsters take the day off. In the summer of 2023, my two best friends, Maya, Chloe, and I scored tickets to see our favorite band. The only catch was that the concert was at a venue on the south side of Detroit, an area we knew had a pretty rough reputation. But the tickets were cheap. We were all going together, and the venue itself was supposed to be secure, so we figured we would be fine. We were young and felt invincible, more excited about the music than worried about the location. The concert was incredible. The energy, the lights, the feeling of being in a crowd of thousands of people all singing the same songs. It was everything we had hoped for. We left the venue around 10 o'clock at night, ears ringing and voices hoarse, feeling on top of the world. That feeling faded pretty quickly when we got to my car, a little Ford Focus, and joined the mass exodus from the parking lot. We crawled onto the main road and came to a dead stop. It was a sea of red taillights as far as the eye could see. After sitting in the exact same spot for what felt like 30 minutes, with the cars ahead of us barely moving an inch, our post-concert high was completely gone, replaced by frustration. Chloe, who was in the passenger seat, pulled out her phone. "There has to be another way out of here," she said, tapping at her map app. "Okay, look, if we take this next right, we can cut through a few neighborhood streets and get back on the freeway in like 10 minutes. It bypasses all this traffic." Maya, from the back seat, and I both agreed it was worth a shot. Anything was better than sitting in this parking lot of a street. As soon as we had a chance, I turned off the main road and onto a dark, narrow side street. We were immediately struck by how different it was. The noise and lights of the main drag were gone, replaced by a strange, heavy silence. The houses were old and packed tightly together, many with boarded-up windows and overgrown yards. What was really strange, though, was the number of people who were just outside. It was late, almost 11 o'clock on a weeknight, but there were people everywhere. Small groups stood on front porches, silhouettes in the dim glow of a single street light. Lone figures walked slowly down the sidewalks. Men sat on the hoods of parked cars. This was not like our quiet suburban neighborhood back home, where everything shut down after 9. As we drove deeper into the neighborhood, a new, unsettling feeling started to creep in. Every person we passed stopped what they were doing and turned to watch us drive by. It was not a casual glance. It was a focused, unblinking stare. Their heads would turn in unison, following the path of my little Ford Focus as if it were some alien spacecraft. Maya noticed it too. "Is it just me, or is everyone staring at us?" she whispered from the back. It was not just her. The friendly chatter in the car died down, replaced by a nervous tension. We also started to realize that we had not seen a single other car since we turned off the main road. We were completely alone, cruising through this strange, silent neighborhood where we were the main attraction. "Chloe, how much farther to the freeway?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My hands were gripping the steering wheel a lot tighter than they were a few minutes ago. "Just a couple more blocks," she said, though her voice sounded a little strained. She was scrolling through the map on her phone. As she was looking, Maya suddenly gasped from the back seat. "Sarah, stop!" I looked up. At the end of the street, where we were supposed to turn, a car was parked sideways, completely blocking both lanes. It was a big, dark SUV, and it was positioned perfectly to prevent anyone from getting through. I slammed on the brakes, my heart instantly pounding in my chest. This was wrong. This was very, very wrong. Without a word, I threw the car into reverse, backed up quickly, and swung onto the street we had just come from. We would just go down another block and try a different street. "Okay, that was weird," Chloe said, her eyes wide. We were all thinking the same thing. It looked deliberate. It looked like a roadblock. I continued down the new street, driving a little faster now. The feeling of being watched was even more intense. It felt like every dark window held a pair of eyes. We just needed to get back to a main road, back to civilization. But as we approached the end of this street, we saw it again. Another car, this one an old, beat-up sedan, parked sideways, blocking our path. I stopped the car in the middle of the road. I looked at Chloe in the passenger seat, then at Maya in the rearview mirror. Their faces were pale with fear. We were all speechless. This was not a coincidence. It was a trap. We were being herded like animals. It was too dark to see if anyone was inside the car up ahead. We did not want to get any closer to find out. "What do we do?" Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "Should we call the police?" Before we could even decide, two men emerged from the shadows of a porch on our right. They walked out into the middle of the street and started moving toward our car with a calm, deliberate pace. One of them walked toward my driver's side window, while the other circled around to the back of the car. My first instinct was to slam the car in reverse and floor it, but the man behind the car positioned himself directly in my path. I was boxed in. The first man reached my window. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie that shadowed his face. He did not say anything. He just looked at me. Then his gaze moved to Chloe, and then to Maya in the back. He was scanning the inside of the car, taking inventory of us. Then, he raised his hand and made a circular motion with his finger, signaling for me to roll down the window. My mind was screaming at me not to, but I was terrified of what would happen if I refused. I pressed the button and lowered the window, but only a few inches, just enough to talk through. The man leaned down, and I could smell stale cigarette smoke on him. "Where are you girls headed?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. "We're just trying to get back to the highway," I managed to say, my own voice barely a squeak. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. He looked over at his friend, who was now walking up along the passenger side of the car. There was a brief, terrifying moment where everything seemed to stop. The world went silent and nobody moved. It was the calm before the storm. Then, all at once, chaos erupted. Both men lunged for the car doors, their hands grabbing the handles and yanking on them repeatedly. The sound of the handles clicking against the locked doors was deafening. I reacted on pure adrenaline. I screamed, my friends were screaming, and I slammed the car into reverse. I did not care about the man behind me anymore. As I started to back up, the man at my window tried to shove his arm through the small gap I had left open. He was trying to reach the lock to get inside. For a split second, his arm was actually stuck in the window as the car moved backward. He let out a yell of pain and surprise before he was pulled free, and he stumbled and fell hard onto the pavement. I did not look back. I turned the wheel, floored the gas pedal, and shot back down the street the way we came. We were all screaming, a mix of terror and relief. I drove like a maniac, ignoring stop signs, just trying to get out of that maze of streets. Finally, I saw the familiar glow of the main road. I burst back out into the traffic, the noise, the lights. It had never felt so wonderful. We were all in total shock, crying and shaking uncontrollably. I stayed in the traffic jam this time, not caring how long it took. It was the safest place in the world. We were lucky our doors were locked. I am absolutely certain that if those men had gotten inside the car, I would not be here today to tell this story. For nearly 20 years, I have been a long-haul truck driver. I have driven through every state in the continental United States, seen more sunrises over empty highways than most people see in a lifetime. My truck, a big Kenworth T680, is more of a home to me than my actual apartment in Omaha. In 2022, I was working for a smaller freight company, hauling frozen goods across the Midwest. Most of my routes were simple out and backs, but every so often, I would get a long run that required an overnight stop. This particular job was one of those. I had to take a full load of frozen pork from Nebraska to a distribution center just outside Salt Lake City, Utah. It was a long, boring drive, mostly just staring at the flat, endless expanse of I-80 through Nebraska and Wyoming. I made my delivery without any issues, got the paperwork signed, and started the long trip back east. By the time I was heading through the middle of Wyoming, it was already well past 1 in the morning. The highway was a black ribbon cutting through a dark, empty landscape. The only other signs of life were the occasional pair of headlights from another truck going the other way. My eyelids were starting to feel heavy, and I knew I needed to pull over and get a few hours of sleep before I became a danger to myself and everyone else. I had seen a sign for a truck stop about 40 miles back, so I figured I would just push through until I got there. I was in that strange hypnotic state that only long-distance drivers know, where your mind kind of goes on autopilot. I was thinking about nothing in particular, just watching the white lines on the road slide under my rig. That is when I saw a flicker of light in my driver's side mirror. It was just a quick flash, but it was enough to pull me out of my trance. I focused on the mirror and saw the distinct glow of headlights. They were positioned directly behind my trailer, so close that the car itself was completely invisible to me. It was sitting in my blind spot, tucked right up against my rear bumper. This is a big problem for a trucker. If I had to hit my brakes for any reason, like a deer running into the road, that car would be turned into a crumpled piece of metal, and I probably would not even feel the impact. My first reaction was annoyance. I assumed it was some kid who did not know how to drive around a semi, or maybe a tired driver who had zoned out. I kept my speed steady at the limit, expecting them to realize their mistake, pull into the left lane, and pass me. But they did not. They just stayed there, glued to my trailer. Minute after minute ticked by, and those headlights remained in my mirror, a constant, unnerving presence. I started to get a bad feeling about it. This was not normal behavior. There was no one else on the road. They had every opportunity to pass me, but they were choosing to stay hidden behind my 48-foot trailer. The truck stop was only a few miles ahead now, and I was looking forward to getting off the road and away from this person. As the big green sign for the rest area came into view, I put on my turn signal and started to ease my rig into the long exit ramp. I checked my mirror again. As I turned, the car behind me slowed down too, its headlights following me off the highway. My unease turned into genuine concern. Okay, this was officially weird. My mind started racing through possibilities. Was it road rage? Did I accidentally cut them off miles back without realizing it? I had dealt with angry drivers before. People who would pull up alongside me and yell, but I had never had someone follow me off the highway and into a truck stop. I navigated my truck through the lot, which was sparsely populated with a few other sleeping rigs, and found a spot at the far end, away from the main building. I pulled in, set the air brake with a loud hiss, and shifted the truck into park. I watched my mirror as the car slowly drove up behind me. It came closer and closer, finally stopping right behind my trailer again. So close that I could not see any part of the vehicle, only the upward glow of its headlights on the back of my trailer doors. Now I was angry and confused. I decided I had to confront this person and find out what their problem was. I was a big guy, and I was not easily intimidated. I swung my door open and jumped down from the cab. The moment my boots hit the pavement, I heard the sound of a car engine revving. Before I could even take a step toward the back of my truck, the car shot backward, tires squealing on the asphalt, and sped out of the parking lot without ever turning its headlights on. I only got a fleeting glimpse of it as it passed under a parking lot light. It was an old, beat-up white sedan, maybe a retired police cruiser, with rust spots all over the body. I could not see the driver. I stood there for a few minutes, the cold Wyoming wind whipping around me. I walked to the back of my truck and checked the locks on the trailer doors. Everything was secure. I looked around the empty lot, but the white car was long gone. Shaking my head, I decided to just forget about it. It was probably just some idiot playing a stupid game. I climbed back into my cab, locked both doors, and did one last check out all the windows. The lot was quiet and still. I pulled the curtain shut behind the driver's seat, kicked off my boots, and lay down in the sleeper berth. Despite the weird encounter, I was exhausted, and I fell asleep almost instantly. A loud bang from the back of my trailer jolted me awake. My heart was instantly pounding. I fumbled for my watch on the little shelf next to the bed. It was just after 3 a.m. I had been asleep for almost 2 hours. I laid there in the darkness, listening, holding my breath. Maybe I dreamed it. Then it came again. A second bang, louder this time, a solid metallic sound. It was the sound of someone hitting the trailer door. I was wide awake now, and a wave of fear washed over me. I slowly and quietly sat up. I looked over at my passenger side mirror. Through the slight grime on the glass, I could see a faint, dark shape moving around at the very back of my trailer. All I could think about was the white car. They had come back. My mind went into overdrive. I kept a small, heavy-duty utility knife in the center console for cutting straps and boxes. I slid out of the bunk and crept into the driver's seat as silently as I could. I grabbed the knife, its cold, heavy handle feeling small and inadequate in my hand. This time, when I got out, I did not slam the door. I pushed it open just enough to slip out, letting it close gently without latching. The air was freezing. I crouched down low and started making my way along the side of my truck, using the massive wheels for cover. As I got closer to the rear of the trailer, I got down on one knee and peered underneath. I could see a pair of legs standing right up against the back doors. Just beyond them, parked where I could not see it from my cab, was the same white sedan, its lights off, looking like a ghost in the dim light of the truck stop. A jolt of pure terror went through me. This was not a random thief. This was the person who had followed me for miles. I was too scared to confront them directly. Instead of stepping out, I stayed hidden and yelled out as loud as I could. "Hey, get away from my truck. The cops are on their way." My voice was shaky, but it worked. The figure at the back of my truck flinched and immediately scrambled into their car. The engine started, and the car sped away even faster than before, disappearing into the darkness. I waited until I was sure they were gone before I stood up and walked to the back of my rig. The metal around the lock on the trailer door was covered in fresh scratches and pry marks. He had been trying to cut or force the lock open. I looked around the empty lot again. No one else seemed to have noticed anything. I was completely alone. The idea of going back to sleep was impossible now. I climbed back into my truck, started the engine, and pulled out of that truck stop. I did not stop driving until the sun came up. I still do not know what that person wanted. They must have thought my trailer was full of valuable cargo they could steal, not knowing it was completely empty on my return trip. But the way they followed me, the way they came back, it felt personal. It is the scariest thing that ever happened to me in all my years of trucking. Even now, sometimes when I am driving late at night, I get this paranoid feeling that there is a car tucked right behind me, just out of sight, following me in the dark.